Hey, follow my YouTube channel and receive new upcoming videos from my channel.
It began with a bruise-colored evening and a church bell that rang when no one had pulled the rope. The bell of St. Jude's had not swung in 40 years. The ladder to the belfry had been removed after a boy slipped and broke his wrist. The rope, coiled and moth-eaten, lay in a glass case near the back pews with a small brass plaque that read "Donated by the Wainwrights, 1923. The bell itself was older than the brick church, older than the road that bent around it like a respectful elbow. It had come from a shipwreck, people said, salvage from a brig that had sunk in a storm off the coast and hauled inland by mules to serve a town that had no sea. On the evening it rang, there was no wind. Maris was sweeping the nave. She liked the hour when the light thinned and the stained glass saints seemed to grow thoughtful, their jeweled robes dimming into ordinary colors. She had volunteered to help the pastor, though he insisted she didn't need to come every day. She came anyway. There were worse places to be than a church that no one filled anymore. The bell rang once. It was not loud. It was not the brash clamor of a festival or the solemn toll of a funeral. It was a sound as round as a stone dropped into a well. It touched the rafters and then touched her. Maris stood very still, the broom bristles whispering against the floor. She waited for the echo. It did not come. "Hello," she said, because the world sometimes answered when spoken to. Nothing answered. The door remained shut. The rope lay behind glass, patient as a fossil. She told herself that old buildings made old sounds. Wood settled. Metal remembered heat. But she knew the voice of the bell. As a child, she had heard it rung for weddings and for a man who had drowned in the quarry. This had been that same voice, as particular as a fingerprint. She put the broom away and walked down the aisle, her footsteps small against the hollow of the church. The ladder to the belfry had indeed been removed.
It began with a bruise-colored evening and a church bell that rang when no one had pulled the rope. The bell of St. Jude's had not swung in 40 years. The ladder to the belfry had been removed after a boy slipped and broke his wrist. The rope, coiled and moth-eaten, lay in a glass case near the back pews with a small brass plaque that read "Donated by the Wainwrights, 1923. The bell itself was older than the brick church, older than the road that bent around it like a respectful elbow. It had come from a shipwreck, people said, salvaged from a brig that had sunk in a storm off the coast and hauled inland by mules to serve a town that had no sea. On the evening it rang, there was no wind. Maris was sweeping the nave. She liked the hour when the light thinned and the stained glass saints seemed to grow thoughtful, their jeweled robes dimming into ordinary colors. She had volunteered to help the pastor, though he insisted she didn't need to come every day. She came anyway. There were worse places to be than a church that no one filled anymore. The bell rang once. It was not loud. It was not the brash clamor of a festival or the solemn toll of a funeral. It was a sound as round as a stone dropped into a well. It touched the rafters and then touched her. Maris stood very still, the broom bristled whispering against the floor. She waited for the echo. It did not come. "Hello," she said, because the world sometimes answered when spoken to. Nothing answered. The door remained shut. The rope lay behind glass, patient as a fossil. She told herself that old buildings made old sounds. Wood settled. Metal remembered heat. But she knew the voice of the bell. As a child, she had heard it rung for weddings and for a man who had drowned in the quarry. This had been that same voice, as particular as a fingerprint. She put the broom away and walked down the aisle, her footsteps small against the hollow of the church. The ladder to the belfry had indeed been removed. There was no way up but the narrow maintenance hatch that required a key. The key hung in the office, on a hook beneath a calendar turned to a month long gone. Maris hesitated. The bell had not rung in 40 years. The pastor said it was safer that way. He was fond of safety, fond of leaving things where they had settled. She took the key. The hatch groaned like an animal disturbed in sleep. The air above was cooler, touched with dust and the dry sweetness of old wood. She climbed the steep iron rungs, her heart pacing her hands. The belfry was smaller than she remembered, a tight square open to the town through slatted windows. The bell hung in its frame, greened with age, its lips scalloped by time. A spider had drawn a line from clapper to beam, a delicate claim on gravity. Maris held her breath. The clapper was still. She approached it the way one approaches a horse, slowly, with a palm open to show she meant no harm. She touched the metal. It was cool, untroubled. "Did you ring?" she whispered, feeling foolish. The bell did not answer. Of course it did not answer. She leaned out through the slats. The town lay beneath her in a shallow bowl of streets and rooftops. A dog barked. A truck rattled over the bridge. Somewhere a radio played a song she half remembered. Then the bell rang again. It rang beneath her hand. It did not swing. The frame did not shudder. The spider's thread did not break. The clapper struck the inside of the bell without moving, or so it seemed, and the sound went through her bones like a swallowed shout. Maris stumbled back, her shoulder striking a beam. The bell did not sway. Her first thought was that she was ill. Her second was that something had found a way to be heard. She climbed down more quickly than she had gone up. In the nave, the air seemed thinner. She stood between the pews and looked toward the tower, as though the sound might have left a mark in the air. The door opened. It was Tomas Hale, who ran the hardware store and had once asked her to dinner in a voice that tried to be brave. He removed his cap when he saw her. "Did you hear that?" he asked. She nodded. "Wind," he offered. "There isn't any." He glanced toward the ceiling. Sounded like the bell. It was the bell. He took a step toward the aisle, then stopped. "That bell doesn't move." "I know." They stood together in the nave, two small witnesses to something neither had asked for. Tomas cleared his throat. "Maybe it's a trick of the air," he said. "Sometimes the bridge hums when the trucks pass." Carrie's sound. The trucks didn't pass until after. He looked at her, measuring her steadiness. "You're sure?" She almost said no, to give him something easier to hold. Instead she said, "I was in the belfry." His eyes widened, not in disbelief but in a kind of reluctant recognition. "And it rang under my hand." He laughed then, a short bark of nerves. "Under your hand?" "Yes. And it didn't move." "No." They were silent. The rope lay in its case, a coiled serpent denied its strike. Tomas rubbed the back of his neck. "I'll fetch the pastor." The pastor came, a small man with a beard that seemed always to be thinking. He listened to them without interruption, his fingers steepled. He asked Maris to show him. They climbed together. Tomas stayed below, as though proximity might worsen the thing. In the belfry, the bell hung as it had hung for decades, patient as a held breath. The pastor reached out and touched it. "It is a bell," he said mildly. "It rang," Maris insisted. He placed his hand against the metal and waited, as if expecting a pulse. Nothing happened. They descended. "Old structures make old sounds," he said gently. "Memory lives in wood and iron. Sometimes we hear what once was." "It rang now," she said. He smiled in a way that did not dismiss her, but did not follow her either. "We will keep an ear on it." The town kept both ears. By morning, everyone had heard. Mrs. Alvarez claimed she had felt the vibration in her teacup. A boy on a bicycle said the sound had chased him down Maple Street. The retired postman insisted he had dreamed of the sea that night, though he had never seen it. The bell did not ring again that day. It rang at dusk. This time, Maris was not in the church. She was at home, slicing carrots for a soup she did not intend to eat alone. The sound came through her open window, round and unhurried. She set the knife down. Across town, Tomas paused mid-hammer. Mrs. Alvarez closed her eyes. The pastor looked up from his desk and did not smile. The bell rang once more, and then was still. The town gathered. They gathered without being called, drawn by a sound that should not have been. They stood in the churchyard beneath a sky the color of pewter. The door was unlocked. They entered in a slow tide. No one spoke. Maris found herself at the front, as though the sound had placed her there. The rope lay behind glass, mute. The hatch to the belfry was closed. The bell rang. It rang above them, and dust sifted down like a blessing or a warning. Some gasped. A child began to cry and was hushed. "Who is up there?" Someone whispered. No one had gone up. The pastor moved toward the hatch, his face pale but resolute. Tomas stepped beside him. Together they climbed. The town waited, a held breath made of many lungs. In the belfry, the bell hung without motion. The clapper rested in its cradle of air. The pastor reached for it. Before his fingers touched metal, the bell rang. He flinched. Tomas swore softly. The bell did not move. "It's impossible," Tomas said. The pastor did not answer. They descended to a congregation of eyes. "It rang," Tomas said unnecessarily. "Of course it rang, Mrs. Alvarez snapped, surprising herself with the sharpness in her voice. "We are not deaf." The pastor lifted his hands. "Let us not leap to conclusions." "What conclusions are there?" someone asked. "A bell that rings without moving." "A sign," murmured the retired postman. "A warning," said another. "A trick," said Tomas, though his voice lacked conviction. Maris felt the sound still in her bones. It had not felt like warning. It had not felt like trick. It had felt like a knock from inside a wall. "What if it is trying to tell us something?" she said. The pastor looked at her. What would it tell? She did not know. Only that the sound had weight, and that weight pressed somewhere in her chest. The bell rang again, and this time the windows shivered. A crack appeared in the glass case that held the rope. It was small, a silver vein across the surface. But everyone saw it. The rope had not moved in 40 years. The bell rang every evening thereafter. It did not ring at the same hour. Sometimes it rang at noon, startling forks against plates. Sometimes it rang in the thin hours before dawn, threading itself through dreams. It never rang more than 3 times in a day. It never rang when the church was empty. People began to sit in the pews again. They came not for sermons but for the sound. They came to witness the impossible and to be witnessed by it. The pastor preached shorter messages. He spoke of listening. Maris found herself watching faces when the bell rang. Some closed their eyes. Some gripped the pews. Some smiled with a relief that bordered on tears. On the 7th day, the crack in the glass spread. It crept like frost across the case. The rope within seemed to stir, though no one saw it move. The bell rang. The glass shattered. The rope fell from its cradle and lay across the floor, a long, pale line between past and present. No one touched it. The bell did not ring again that day. The town stood in a silence that felt earned. Perhaps, the pastor said slowly, we should put the rope back. Why, Mrs. Alvarez demanded. It hasn't needed it. Tomas bent and picked up the rope. Dust rose from it in a faint cloud. He held it in his hands, uncertain. Maris stepped forward. Wait, she said. They all looked at her now, as if she had been chosen by proximity. She approached the rope. It was rough and dry, but strong beneath the fray. She imagined hands long gone gripping it, pulling it into voice. The bell had rung without motion. But what if motion had not meant what they thought? What if it is not the bell that is moving, she said slowly, but us? They frowned. She tried again. The bell has always been here. We are the ones who stopped listening. Maybe it never stopped ringing. That's nonsense, Tomas said, but softly. Is it? She asked. The bell rang. It rang so gently that it seemed to come from within their chests. No dust fell. No beam shuddered. The sound was as intimate as breath. Maris felt something loosen inside her. She reached for the rope. Tomas inhaled sharply. The pastor said her name. She wrapped her hands around it. For a moment, nothing happened. The rope was only rope. Then she pulled. The bell rang. This time, it moved. The frame groaned. The clapper struck with a bright, undeniable note. The sound leapt from tower to sky, from sky to street. It was louder than before, but not harsher. It was the same voice, now given body. Maris laughed, startled by her own boldness. She pulled again. The bell answered. Below, the town erupted, not in fear, but in something like recognition. People began to clap. Someone began to sing, a hymn half remembered and wholly meant. The pastor climbed the rungs 2 at a time. He emerged in